Remember is that the internet can be is very volatile, as in it changes between good and bad. On one side, it is good because it's a great way to get information, it's a great way to stay connected. But on the other hand, it can be very distracting for a lot of teens. Let's go on to video games.
Well, hello. In case you've forgotten, my name is James Ling, and I am a junior at Monte Vista High.
And once again, guys, my name is Nick. I'm a senior at Leland. Let's begin.
Well, today, Nick and I are here to tell you about how you, your child, and video games can all have a sustainable relationship with one another. But first off, I think I'd like to give you a quick and dirty rundown of the different types of video games. First off, there is the RPG, which is an acronym for a role-playing game. In a RPG, you role-play as a character. For example, a hero with a magical sword, often stayed his homeland from the evil demon lord. In role-playing games, you typically role-play as those kind of characters. And two very popular titles from the RPG include the Final Fantasy series and the Shin Megami Tensei series. Another very popular genre of the video game is the FPS, which is yet another acronym for first-person shooter. In the FPS, you play as a person with a gun going around shooting other people. Two very popular titles of the FPS include Modern Warfare and the Battlefield series, as shown in the picture above. The third popular genre of video game is the MMO, or the Massive Multiplayer Online. For one type of MMO, you actually have to pay a monthly subscription fee in order to be able to access your account every month. However, there are still some free MMOs, like League of Legends or Team Fortress 2. And the final genre of game that I'm going to tell you about is the simulation. In simulation games, you often simulate things like driving cars at really high speeds or raising a family. Two popular titles for the simulation genre include Need for Speed and The Sims.
Why play video games? That is the million-dollar question for a lot of parents. Why is my teen or child playing video games? And for me personally, it's number one, to relieve stress. After a week of just tests, projects, homeworks, and just working with other people, I get really frustrated, and I need to release that stress before I have to blow up a brick or something. So I like to sit down, play a lot of video games, and it just really helps. And here's the reason why, actually. So one of them is just an escape from reality. I get to forget about let's say I didn't do so well on the test, and I just want to get that feeling out of my brain. So I'll sit down, play a couple hours of Battlefield, and I'll feel better. Now, the second one is just for fun. Now, everybody likes to have fun. Nobody's going to lie and say, hey, I like to get all worked up and angry all the time. But it's always, the point of video games is to have fun. You like to go out and play something. So, and when you try to play, a lot of the times now during the school year, it gets dark really early, and you can't really go outside and play because your friends are like, oh, I got homework. It's too dark outside. I don't want to run to your house. So what you can do is you can play by yourself. But the thing with video games is actually you can play with friends now. Due to the integration of the internet, you can hop online on some games. If your friend has the game, he or she can hop online as well, and they can play together. And also you can talk to each other. There's even, people can have microphones and, they can listen to each other, they can talk to each other while they're playing the games. And, it's really fun to interact. So, here are some positive side effects of video games. Now, I'm a gamer myself, so I think that, these are really interesting, and they're really important in real life. So one of them is that it increases dexterity and reflexes. Now it seems kind of weird, but when you think about it, when you're playing video games, you're constantly using your hands and your eyes. Your eyes are relaying information to your hands, and you're using that information to move left, right, shoot, jump over something, and you're always pressing a button, whether it's on mouse and keyboard when you're playing on the PC, or on a controller when you're using a console like PlayStation 3 or Xbox. So that will come, really important, when you go onto the real world, how fast you can type. That'll definitely be something that's very important in the job market. Now, the second one is that video games can increase problem-solving skills. While you're playing a game, there's always a certain goal, and with that, you always want to try and think outside of the box as to how to attain that goal, and that can be related into real life situations. Say you want to get an A on the test, and you don't know what you're doing. you don't know what you're doing that's wrong, and that you've been getting B's, C's, D's. So what you're thinking is, wow, maybe I should study more. I should pay attention to class. I should sleep less in class, let's say. And so that will basically become more apparent as you play, not really actually, but when you start to think more outside the box. Now, like I said before, there are a lot of goals in video games, and when you think about it, you attain some sort of goal-oriented mindset. You're always thinking about what's the next goal. You want to think, okay, if I can get a B on this test, I know I can raise my GPA, I can get an A in class, and you always say, what's next? What do I want to get next? That always happens in video games. So when you take that sense in the video games and take it into real life, you become more objective. You think, okay, so I can graduate from high school now. What can I do? Which college can I get to? Do I want to go to San Jose State? Do I want to go to Berkeley? Or something like that. The video games can bring a sense of, objectivity, and that you always want to push for something better. Now, the last one here is that video games can provide an experience of failure. There's always that infamous game over screen from a lot of video games. You always fail at a task, and you feel really bad about it. But for a lot of players like me, I want to sit down and try to think about what did I do wrong. Like I said before, in that grade scenario, a lot of gamers will think, what did I do wrong that caused me to fail? So when you bring that into the real life, once again, let's say for school, once again, if you fail at a test or something and you felt like you didn't do so well, you'll think about different ideas as to how you can get better. What ways do you think that you can use? What different ways can you use to get better? And you won't get depressed as to depressed by constant failure. You'll keep going. Now, one little side note that I want to say is that in this article in Newsweek published probably about 2 or 3 years ago, they claimed that playing action games will help increase focus and relieve stress. So I put this here because it was really interesting, because their study was actually conducted on soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iraq who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, in which basically they had experienced a really traumatic event, such as an IED going off or their buddy getting killed. And so what that happened was that they were able to deal more with their depression and their stress better when they played video games. They were able to release that stress, and it was really easy. It was easier for them to overcome a lot of that pain and suffering that they felt. So we'll be moving on to the negative side effects. Now, these two are pretty apparent for a lot of us. One of them is to decrease focus on academics, and the other one is that video games just take up too much time. So when you think about it, it's pretty simple. Video games, they decrease focus on academics. You're playing too much. You don't spend as much time as you could have when you're studying for a test, working on a project, or writing a really long essay. And also, takes up too much time. Like I said, you just spend too much time on it, and you're constantly thinking about it. Even when you're at school, like your school, you're thinking, oh, what can I do to level up to level 40, Skyrim level 30 Archer or something like that. So what is video game addiction?
Well, according to that poll that we recently mentioned in the previous section, students believe that video game addiction is when a person is unable to stay away from video games for a long period of time. Now, I'd like to give you a quick story about video game addiction, and perhaps a small tip of what you parents might be able to do with video game addiction. You see, back when I was a kid, I used to always play video games with my brother. It'd be kind of a family bonding experience. The two of us would play Super Smash Bros. Together, or maybe some Mario Party or Mario Kart. After a while, when we grew up, we started playing MMOs together, like Team Fortress 2. Eventually, my brother went off to college, and at this point, my mother started saying video games was like a waste of time. So one day, she went up to me and said, "James, you stop playing the video game." And I said, "No." At this point, she pretty much took away all the video game consoles I had on me, and I was left with nothing really to do. However, I still was able to play video games on the console. On my PC, was on my mother knowing. This one went on for a little while until my mother and I finally decided to talk through this with my mother. So in the end, we finally decided that I'd be able to play video games for 2 to 3 hours over the weekend. And during days like winter break or any Christmas holiday, I'd be able to play for 2 to 3 to 4 hours. However, now I'm a junior, I'm on just a high, so obviously I don't even have time to play spend these hours playing video games. So I end up using this time to study. Now back to video game addiction. According to the poll, as mentioned in the previous section, parents now believe that video game addiction is when video games interfere with school or academic work. Of course, you can see the slight difference between what students believe video game addiction is and what parents believe video game addiction truly is.
Right, so that brings us to what the conflict is. It's a disagreement over the time played in video games, and it's very common in households. For me, personally, my parents always said, wow, you know, you're playing too many video games. Don't you have anything better to do, like going outside and making friends? But, you know, for me, I was like, oh no, I'm making friends on the internet, you know? It doesn't matter whether I know who the person is, I just know them by, like, the weird screen name. So, like I said, it's very common in households. It happens a lot. Like, for me personally, it happened. For a lot of my friends, it happened to them as well. So, that brings us to ways to solve the conflict. Now, these won't work for everybody, but it's a good starting point. So the first one that I would like to talk about is a reward-based system. So what that means is basically, let's say Billy wants to play video games. So for Billy to be able to access a video game or to play a video game, he has to finish his homework. And he has an agreement with his parents saying, okay, before I am able to play video games, I have to finish all my homework. Whether it takes 2 or 3 hours, I get to play video games, let's say for an hour or hour or two after. So now the second one is to create a time slot in which teens can play. So that basically means that, let's say on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they only can play from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. So that's an hour window for them on all 3 of those days to play. So that means that outside of 7 to 8 p.m., they cannot play video games. They can do their homework, they can sleep, they can shower, they can eat, they can go hang out with friends. But only in that window, only in that 1 hour window can they play video games. So that basically gives parents a little bit of more comfort to say, okay, I know that they won't play video games until this certain time.
Most important thing to remember about these 2 tips is to keep an agreement on these video game policies. If you cannot agree on these policies, obviously the 2 of you have to solve some conflict between the 2 of you. And here's perhaps a little tip for maybe some of you fathers out there. Perhaps you can play video games with your son or daughter who enjoys video games. I actually have a friend who actually plays video games with his father, and he believes that this is actually a very fun bonding experience with him.
Okay, so that basically wraps up our video game presentation. What I'd like to leave off with you guys is this one sort of small statement. Ultimately, parents do have the control over whether the teen gets to play video games or not. They can say, you know what, I don't want you to play, so let's just cut it. But for me, my own experience, when that happened, it was sort of a very, well, let's just say I got really angry a lot of the times because, I wanted to play. So our last hint here is that, don't try to get your teen to stop playing altogether, because ultimately it will lead to more conflicts. And the main goal of our presentation is to, help solve those conflicts, help lessen the conflicts. And so with that, for me, it would have been a little bit more agreeable if my parents had slowly diminished the amount of video games I played, let's say from 2 hours to an hour and a half, to hour to 30 minutes, and to 0. Like for me, as a senior, last year during my junior year was one of the more busier years for me, so I didn't really play as many video games. I realized that video games aren't as important as I thought it was, as important as I thought it was.